I'm excited to kind of be the first attempt at doing this virtual working woodlands over Zoom. So hopefully it works out well. In a minute, I'll share my screen here and hopefully all the technology works. But before I do that, just yeah, quick introduction. I mean, Joey kind of said it all, but I do work for the National Park Service, obviously, and I've been a park ranger for about 20 years or so at a bunch of parks. And right now we are in Vermont, based out of Marsh-Billings-Rockefeller in Woodstock, Vermont. So, and I'm going to see if my screen sharing skills are up to snuff here. Let's try this one and try that. Does everybody, does that work, Joey? Can you see my screen correctly?
Yep, I can see you. If anyone's having any trouble, please chime in.
All right, so yeah, so you'll see on this slide here, National Park Service, and then below that, inventory monitoring and Northeast Temperate Network. I'm not going to bore you guys too much with the details of my job and what I do, but basically, I help the National Park Service monitor natural resources in about 13 national parks in the Northeast. And I also get to do a bunch of education kind of programs like this, which is great. Tracking is one of my favorite things to do, not only when I'm working with people, but also just on my own, just walking down the sidewalk in a busy city street or in the middle of the woods in the middle of nowhere. Tracking is great because you can, pretty much do it anywhere. And this time of year, of course, especially if you're from a place where there's snow on the ground, is the best time of year to do it because, every time there's a new snowfall, you have a new opportunity to see fresh tracks out there where, an animal had walked by, a few minutes before to, several days before or so. So kind of really use all your senses, really. The reason I like tracking is because, we obviously think of tracks in the snow when we're thinking of tracking, but there's a lot more to it than that. And you can see, some of those in the slide here with signs left behind by either feeding signs or by other behaviors that they have. So, you're using your eyes, you can use your sense of touch too. You can go over to this tree and put your fingers on it and rub it up and down and feel the way that the animal's either left those marks with its teeth or with its antlers. You can use your sense of smell too. Not everybody is, excited to stick their nose in the snow where a fox scent marked. Can be, kind of off-putting to some folks, but it's very interesting to be able to do because it's a sure sign that a fox went by when you can smell that kind of skunky odor that they leave behind when they scent mark. So that's definitely a part of tracking. Using your ears is part of tracking. You can, kind of track right from your own house and the windows are open and you hear a group of coyotes outside howling together. Foxes make all sorts of interesting sounds as well too. So, ears, eyes, nose, it's all part of tracking. And I often think of tracking as, you're kind of being a detective when you're tracking out there. You're seeing all these things and trying to take them all in. And there's a lot of TV crime shows out there nowadays. It seems like, there's more and more of them every time. But one of the kind of classic ones that most of you are probably familiar with, I assume, would be the CSI kind of series. And they use their senses too, and for kind of solving crimes and things like that. But they also need a lot of fancy equipment when they're doing their crime solving with their special kind of lights that can pick up different kind of blood spatters and all that kind of stuff that they use during those TV shows. But for tracking, you don't need anything. All you need are your senses. And I like to kind of compare it to CSI because I know it's similar to that, but it's a little bit different than that because, again, you only need your own signs. That's why I call this TSI. And here's your animals. They left all these signs behind, and we have some nice Northwoods sounds behind us here too. So yeah, So hopefully that came through and you can hear that and see that. Okay, but yeah, so this is our TSI that we're going to do here, our track and sign investigation instead of crime scene investigation or whatever they do. And again, I'm not going to get too much into this. I want to get into tracking as soon as possible because of our limited time here. But again, what I do is work with inventory monitoring, trying to help the National Park Service live up to its mission here, which basically at the very end here, you can see that it's to leave the parks unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. And it's hard to do that when you don't know what you have and you don't know what condition it's in. So that's kind of what our inventory is. We're finding out, what natural resources the parks have, and then we're monitoring them over the long term so the parks can make the best informed decisions about how to work with water quality, how the health of the forests are going, how their bird populations are doing, all that kind of stuff. And it's a really interesting job to work in the parks like that and to work directly with park management staff as well. So that's the main idea behind what I do. And it is, we again work in 13 parks from Acadia, the coast of Acadia, all the way down to Morristown, New Jersey, doing a lot of the things I just mentioned, including on occasion, tracking, believe it or not, comes up as part of that. There was a study done on Maine's Appalachian Trail, which is actually part of the National Park Service. Maybe not all of you know that the Appalachian Trail is a national scenic trail, so it's actually managed by the Park Service. And they were doing a study on Canada lynx in the far north of Maine. And, those of you know about lynx know that they're a pretty secretive animal and, they can be hard to find and see. But just like everything else that walks through the snow, they leave tracks and sign behind. So one way that they were able to kind of estimate the population of lynx up there were to, try to find their tracks and their scat up there. And that helped them kind of estimate a little bit better how many lynx are up there compared to if they just tried to get a visual sighting of them. So tracking is an important part of science too. It's not just kind of a fun hobby. It's actually a respectable part of the way people kind of keep track of where animals are and where they're going. And there are many reasons to track that we'll get into here. And this is a great photo that I like here because this is one of the ones that where you can really try to put your skills of observation, because observation is very important to tracking, obviously. And when you look at this image here, I want you to tell me how many, you don't have to tell me, but just try to see how many people that you can see in this image. I'll give you just a few seconds to look at it. When I look at it, I see, there's obviously, hopefully you can see my pointer. There's, this guy here, and there's maybe you just barely be able to see that guy. So, you might think there's only 2 people in this image, but, if you really have your tracking glasses on, your powers of observation, maybe you saw this guy sitting by the tree here. He's actually leaning right against a tree. There's his shirt kind of blends right in. His legs go up and down like this here. So, sometimes you really need to, when you're tracking, really focus in and really try to see all that you can see. So good for you if you guys saw this guy here. If not, don't worry, it took me a long time to find him too the first time I saw this image. So it's, it's one of those things where you just really got to open up your eyes and really try to see all that you can see. And there are many reasons to track. One of them is, again, it's an important part of science, and it's a great non-invasive, low disturbance way. You're not disturbing animals necessarily when you're just seeing their tracks. And it helps you learn what animals you share your neighborhoods and our national parks with. A very good way of kind of getting a base inventory. And as I was saying, my favorite part of being a tracker is that you get to be a mystery solver. Whether it be in the middle of the woods or it be in your very own kitchen. Maybe you could solve the mystery of, who stole your breakfast sausage, if you saw this one here. I bet a lot of you could probably figure out, what you're saying here. It looks like Fluffy, the cat, kind of nabbed your sausage before you got it there. So, it could come in handy anywhere, in your house or in the woods. And, again, studying what animals are, where they are and where they're moving, and those kinds of things can help scientists better understand the health of ecosystems, the entire environment outside, and follow the effects of climate change too, because animals obviously are very affected by what climate they're living in, and they're responding to climate as it changes as well. So when new animals move into an area or leave an area, that can kind of help scientists understand how things are changing in that area as well. And going on with being like a mystery solver as well too. When you kind of dive into the world of tracking, really a whole new world of animal language is opened up to you. And what I mean by that is, you can come across a scene like this in the middle of the woods, and while you look at it, you can start asking yourself, a bunch of different questions. Obviously the most common, who was here, but also you can ask why were these animals here, even what happened when these animals were here, and sometimes even you can get an idea what their mood was, which is pretty amazing. When you think about it, from just a bunch of holes in the snow, you can kind of get this whole story that opens up to you, and you can kind of read the language of what they left behind for you to see here. And as we look at this particular example here, I can tell you that this track we see coming from the top of the screen moving down is actually a male fisher loping through the woods going in this direction. And the other set of tracks is a female fisher coming across. And if we could see closer into the tracks, you notice that the male fisher tracks came first and the female fisher tracks went over his tracks. There's a couple things you can notice already in this. One is that the male tracks seem to be quite a bit larger than the female tracks. So now you know that there was a male and a female moving through. And this photograph was taken in Marsh-Billings-Rockefeller in Woodstock in the month of March, which March is actually the mating season for these animals. So that means they're very aware of each other's presence at this time. Males at this time kind of expand their territories a bit in search of a female to mate with. And in this particular case, the female came through her territory after the male came through. And as we kind of roll the tape here, you'll see the female crossed his tracks, and here she puts the brakes on. She stops cold, and this is actually a walking pattern for the fisher. So the female walks up to these tracks here. Here's her two front feet right here, and this is one of the male's tracks right here. So you can start to get a picture in your mind of what actually happened here. The female ran by, got a whiff in the air of that the male had passed, walked over, and she probably even stuck her nose right in that track there. She saw those tracks, got a smell of him, and every time a wild animal takes a step, they have these glands in their feet, and those glands leave scent behind. That scent tells other animals all about that animal. It tells them the sex of the animal, so she knew that this was a male. You can get some idea of the health of the animal too. She could tell whether or not he was a healthy fisher or not, just by smelling his tracks. I'm getting an idea of why he was in the neighborhood because of the time of year that it was. And then she seemed to satisfy her curiosity fine, and this is just a normal loping pattern again for a fisher. This is kind of their natural way that they move through the woods. So she satisfied her curiosity and kind of moved on from that point. So it's a really amazing thing again to be able to see that story there with just those few holes in the snow. And I don't try to put a lot of rules on my, on people or myself when I'm tracking. But again, the most important kind of thing is to keep an open mind. So kind of the number one rule I always try to follow and have to remind myself of a bit too, especially when you start to get kind of cocky about, been tracking for a while and starting to really feel like you got your skills down. You should always just remember to never say never and never say always. And what I mean by that is, sometimes you can read, like in a tracking book, for example, that cats don't leave claw marks in their tracks. And while that's true most of the time, it's not true all the time. Sometimes they do leave tracks, claw marks. And you need to remember as well that the animals can't read. This bobcat can't read a tracking book to know what it's supposed to leave behind, right? So sometimes they don't follow the rules completely. They kind of get a little confused when they're supposed to follow these certain rules and they don't actually follow them all the time, because when a cat is running, a bobcat or any other kind of cat, they can put their claws out, and often do, to get a better grip on the ground that they're in. So you can see tracks with claws in them, rarely, but you can sometimes see it. Another kind of rule 1.5, I call it, is tracking is great because you can only have to go as deep as you want. What do I mean by that? Is you can get very deep into the technical aspects of tracking if you're a very technical person, and you literally want to measure tracks down to the 1/8 of an inch when you're out there and get your tape measure and take all these notes and all that stuff and learn about all the different kinds of digits and toe pads and metacarpal pads and all those kind of things that animals have, and all the different strides and different ways they can move through the woods. I mean, you can get pretty deep into the details, but you can also be kind of a very kind of high level tracker, and you could just be walking by and see, oh look, that's where a squirrel went by, and then you can keep going. You don't have to get bogged down in the details if you don't want to, but if you really like kind of getting deep into something, tracking is definitely something that's for you, so you can really study very deeply into this stuff. And this is something that's not for everybody either as well too. This is kind of a board game I made up called Scattergories instead of categories, because scat is what animals leave behind. And it can be a bit off-putting to some folks. Not everybody is into looking at scat and breaking it apart, but it is definitely a part of tracking. We're not going to get into too much detail about it during our presentation here, but just know that that is something that's a big part of tracking. Just very quickly, just these 2 coyote scats tells us a lot. This one is full of deer fur, and there's bits of bone in there, so we know that this coyote was scavenging a deer that had been killed a while ago, and there wasn't many good kind of organs and things like that left. Whereas this one here is a very dark coyote scat, and when it's dark like that, usually means that was a meal that was from a fresh kill that coyote had. So we kind of know, what it was eating and when it was eating it just by looking at the scat too. So and you can identify species of animals too just by looking at scat. So it's very much a big part of tracking for sure. And it's also important to remember that there are lots of different ways to move when you're an animal. You can move through the woods in all sorts of different ways, but just keeping in mind that, if you kind of remember this equation at the top of the screen here, most of the animals that you track have 4 legs. So, it's kind of a mathematical formula of, 4 legs times the speed that the animal's moving, whether it's walking or, hopping or running all out. Also always underlying that conservation of energy. Wild animals don't like to waste energy if they don't have to. They don't necessarily know where their next meal is coming from, so there's not a lot of wasting and running around of energy. Unlike your pets, your pet dog is always having fun running around out there. And this means that, of course, amount of legs, speed, trying to conserve energy, what kind of substrate we're going through. A substrate just means, like, is it snow, is it mud, is it pavement? That all has effect on the gait option. Gait is a kind of a tracker's term, just meaning how did their feet land, when they were moving? What gait option did they use? Was it a walk? Was it a trot? Was it a gallop? And just looking at these dogs, you can see even them on this treadmill are using all sorts of different options depending on what's going on in there. So just something important to keep in mind. Also, it's helpful to know, kind of, being a mystery solver, who your usual suspects are. And, in the Northeast, where we're presenting from, these are, kind of a bunch of your usual suspects. But, as our friend here is kind of shrugging his shoulders, it's like, well, where do you start? I mean, this is like kind of an overwhelming list of animals if you're not, familiar with some of them, and it can kind of seem a little kind of intimidating maybe if you're just getting into this. But the great thing about wild animals is that, just like you and me, wild animals are part of families. They're part of family groups. They, for kind of an analogy, they have cousins and relatives and things like that they share similar traits with, just like we do. Sometimes we don't want to admit it, but sometimes we're pretty similar to members of our family, just as they are to us. So what I mean by that is, all these animals fall into different, scientific categories. The mustelids, the weasels, the fishers, the ermines, the weasels, the minks, the otters, the striped skunk, they're all part of the weasel family. and they all share similar characteristics. They all often move the same way as all their cousins do. They have there's a particular gait pattern that they use that you can use to help kind of diagnose, what family the tracks that you're seeing in, and kind of help narrow it down. The rodents as well have similar characteristics as well, as do the cats and the dogs families, and the canids, the foxes and coyotes that we have, the moose and deer, the rabbit and hare family. So, it starts to make it a little less intimidating when you can kind of learn about the groups of animals, come into it from that perspective, learn about, kind of characteristics of dog tracks, characteristics of weasel tracks, and you're kind of narrowing it down to, a group of 6 or 7 categories rather than over 20 or so. So that can be a lot less intimidating when you do it that way. And what we're going to do here, I'm going to jump into a couple of these animals that we see here, and then maybe Joey or some people can help me. I want you folks to give me some suggestions. We can have some time to do some of the animals that maybe that you guys want to see on here, time willing. So I do want to start with the fisher, just because it's one of my favorite animals, and it's an amazing animal to track through the woods. And the good thing about that is we're having more and more opportunity to do that, because their population seems to be doing pretty well in recent years. The past decade or so seems to have actually increased quite a bit in the Northeast, to the point where they're being seen more often than they used to be, and maybe not so much wilderness settings, more often in people's backyards, more often in fairly busy urban centers even. So they seem to be kind of adapting well to having people around more so than they used to. And some of these, hopefully these videos are coming across okay for you folks out there, but a lot of them are videos I took myself with my trail cameras that I have all around my property and other places. So, it's a great way to be able to see animals and study them and see what they're doing out there. So fishers are, again, amazing animals. You can see here kind of the category. They can be fairly large. A large male fisher can be 13 pounds, which is, a pretty good size individual. And females are much smaller, about half the size of the male fisher. So there's a big difference between males and females, which means there's probably a big difference between the kinds of prey that they go after. These are 2 fishers that are being studied. They are just about put to sleep for this, so they're not being traumatized during this time. But this is a male on the right and a female on the left. So you can see just by this how much larger they are, the males are than the females. And this is a look at even the way their bodies are built. This is a very typical weasel skull for both of them, kind of elongated with the sharp teeth up front and sharp teeth on the sides too. So they are generally meat eaters. This is a female skull on the top, a male skull on the bottom, and you can probably notice some differences already. The male skull does seem to be more robust than the females. Very smooth on the top of the females and kind of elongated. There's a bit more of a pronounced kind of forehead on the male. And this is a very telling thing to people who study bones, to people who study skulls and animals in particular. This is called a sagittal crest. And you can see it's lacking in the female's skull. Coyotes have a big sagittal crest. Black bears and grizzly bears have even bigger crests here. And their purpose, it's not a fin on the top of their head. This is actually where muscles attach, specifically muscles that run down to the jawbone here. And when they have this crest here, it means that they have very strong jaws. Bears, coyotes, male fishers all have a very strong bite, which means a male fisher can go after larger prey probably than a female fisher can, just because they do have the ability to have that stronger bite. So just interesting differences even between males and females of the same species here. One of those larger prey that males go after the females don't often, as usually, is the porcupine. Fisher are one of the few animals that actively hunt porcupine. there's not too many that are brave enough or foolish enough to do it. But fishers do successfully hunt porcupines quite often because they employ a strategy of kind of trying to tree. Often a porcupine's best defense is climbing up in a tree or butting up against a tree and having its quills face backwards towards the animal that's trying to come towards it. But a fisher will often jump up in that tree. They're very, very fast and adept at running and climbing trees, so they can actually run up around the porcupine. And not to get too graphic, but they do kind of attack the face area of the porcupine until the porcupine gets exhausted, and they're able to roll it over and then not have to deal with those quills. So they have a very kind of specific way of being able to have porcupines to feed themselves and feed their young as well too. And getting into the actual tracks of tracking here for fisher. All the tracking books, if you do get any, they'll all tell you about how many toes the animals have, what kind of feet they have, either whether it be plantigrade or digitigrade. Plantigrade means they're flat-footed like us, human beings. Our heels come down when we walk and run, as opposed to a digitigrade animal, which is up on its toes most of the time. It's like things like cats and dogs are digitigrade. They don't often are fully flat-footed. So you can see kind of here that you do see the heel pads of this particular fisher here. And fisher actually have larger front feet than they do hind feet, which is kind of a helpful diagnostic as well too when you're trying to figure out their tracks. And also, of course, this is like the perfect track. You don't often get tracks so pristine, be able to see all the toes very easily, the toe pads, the heels, all those kinds of things, very nice claw marks. You're very rarely going to get that actually. So, it's good to study these things about how many toes they have. It can be very helpful. But I find the most helpful part of tracking is not so much worrying with the details of the toes and claws and things like that. Again, helpful, but not as helpful perhaps as learning the ways that these animals move. Their particular gait patterns or trail patterns can be very helpful and diagnostic of what animal that you're seeing. And the fishers, being part of the weasel family, weasels often move in what's called this 2x2 lope. And again, don't get too bogged down in the details of what's called the lope and a trot. There's, depending on what tracking book you're reading, there's no kind of universally agreed upon language about what's a lope and what isn't. But it's just one way of describing the way this animal is moving, not in a run necessarily. And it's pretty descriptive, 2x2. You can probably understand why it's called that. You see 2 here, you see 2 here, you see 2 here. So you're seeing groups of 2 throughout the photo here. What's not as clear as probably what you're seeing though is that each one of these holes, each one of these tracks actually represents 2 feet. Because remember the whole conservation of energy thing. These animals are trying to conserve energy when they're moving through the woods, in snow especially. So, you all know if you've walked in the woods with somebody in snow, deep snow, and then somebody's walking in front of you, you're probably going to use the tracks that they just made as opposed to make your own, right? Because you're saving energy too. It's always harder to be the person in the front who is creating a trail than it is the person behind who's following that. So imagine if you had 4 legs, why wouldn't you use the holes that your front feet made to put your hind feet in, instead of making 4, 2 other holes to their hind feet, using that energy that you didn't have to use when you're going through the snow. So this is actually a foot that landed, a front foot landed here. It came out of the hole and started moving forward. Then the hind foot landed in that exact same spot. It's called a direct register. That hind foot directly registered right on top of where that front foot was. It's very common for a lot of animals, not just fisher, to do this direct kind of register movement through the woods. But this particular 2x2 pattern is a common for fisher. And you see it again often when there's more kind of deeper snow or deeper substrate that they're moving through. When it's not that deep, when maybe that it's not a hindrance to their moving, you might be more apt to see this 3x4 lope. So the other one was called 2x2. This one's called 3x4, and you can probably guess why that is too. Sometimes you can see all 4 tracks in the snow, and sometimes they kind of bunch together like this set here, where you only see kind of 3. So that's where it gets a 3x4. But unlike the other one, these are each individual track. These are, each foot left its own track in the snow. But what probably, might be a little hard to wrap your mind around is that the back track here, the first one that you see, is actually a front foot where it landed. And this top track here is actually where a hind foot landed, which, takes some of your kind of mind power to understand how that happened. But a general rule of tracking, again, is the faster an animal is moving, a 4-legged animal, the farther its hind feet are going to land up ahead. Because when its front feet come down and it pushes off, the rear end actually flies through the air and lands in front of where those front feet were. So this is actually a front right foot of a fisher, and this is the front left foot of a fisher, and this is the hind right foot of a fisher and the hind left foot of a fisher. So 2 front feet here, this is where it pushed off, and then the rear end went ahead of where the front was, and you get 1 foot here and 1 foot here. Very difficult to picture that in your mind. And I'm going to try to show you a video here. I do have some videos to share with you all about these, and I don't think you can't see this video. Is that right, Joey, right now?
I can actually see it.
Oh, you can.
Yep.
Maybe, hopefully everybody can then. That would be good. All right, so I'm going to start it again. And hopefully everybody's seeing this. Let us know if you're not. But this is a video my friend took out the back of his window in Connecticut, in his apartment. There's a river behind his house, and there was a fisher that stuck on this island behind his house, and they kept him running around in circles around the island. They can swim and they can go in the water, but this one is really trying to find a way off this little chunk of island without getting wet. I eventually had to get back in the river and go across. But you are, this, believe it or not, is the animal moving in that 3x4 lope, and I'm going to pause it right here. This is going to help us kind of visualize it a little bit. What we can clearly see here is the 2 front feet are down in the snow, right? Front left, front right. The rear end is up in the air. So this would represent these 2 tracks here, left and right foot. And then kind of as we move forward, as the animal gains speed, you're going to see that its rear end actually flies through the air, and lands ahead of where its front 2 feet were. So we'll kind of go frame by frame here. Right now, it's just turned that corner, so it's just starting to gain speed. So the front feet are down, and then here comes the rear end, and you can kind of see that it's landing ahead of where those front 2 feet just left. And that's why you can get this 3x4. If you can kind of keep an eye on that foot there, and then see that the hind feet, that front foot was right about there, and those hind feet are in front of it. So this is what how these tracks are caused. And what I really like about seeing videos, watch as many as you can, because next time you come across tracks like this in the woods, you're going to be able to have this mental movie playing in your mind. You can actually be able to see that fisher going through the woods, and you're kind of the theater of your mind. You're going to be able to watch that happen right in front of you, just by looking at the tracks, because you study these kinds of videos, which is kind of a really fun and neat thing to be able to do. Okay, that's kind of an introduction to our weasel family. Now I'm going to bring us into the dog family, and the red fox is a great introduction to that. Red fox are, one of the reasons I like doing red fox and fisher back to back is because people are often surprised how small red fox are. You kind of think of fox as like a dog, being in the dog family and everything, but when you look at this, a very large red fox is 15 pounds. Not many of them get to be that size. So, a big male fisher can easily outweigh an average red fox. Average red fox, is right there in the 9 to 10 pound category. They're mostly fur, especially in winter when they're all puffed up and have that big puffy tail and have their winter coat on. There's really not much to them. They're a lot smaller than you would think. here's one that caught a gray squirrel, and you can see just how much of a good meal that gray squirrel is for this fox. And this one chasing this mouse. I mean, even the mouse you can tell is a pretty good meal for the red fox. So red fox are much smaller than you might think they would be in your mind. We don't have gray wolf in this area. This was taken in Alaska, but you can again just get a picture between the cousins here, the dog family. The gray wolf much larger than the red fox. And this is some kind of Photoshop magic here. This is a sand trail camera, but all these animals were not together in this frame at the same time. This was they were photoshopped in. But it shows you again the size differences between gray wolf, coyote, which is a pretty good size, the largest dog member of the family that we have here in the Northeast, and then this tiny red fox. This is very typical size of a red fox. They are not very large animals at all. I mean, this one can run under these legs of this gray wolf quite easily and have plenty of clearance. So they're one of the smaller members of our dog family. And red fox are also one of the more vocal members of kind of the wildlife community that we have. They have a surprising amount of things that they can vocalize when they're out in the woods. And we did Fisher before. Fisher are kind of notorious for the Fisher scream. A lot of people will talk about here in the Northeast, but it's been very well documented that Fisher are pretty silent. They do vocalize when they're next to each other. They can kind of growl when they're feel intimidated, but it's never been documented to have a Fisher scream. It's probably not a thing. It's almost certainly not a thing. And it's almost certainly a red fox that people are hearing when they hear that sound. Red fox do have these amazing wide variety of vocalizations that they can make. And I'm going to try to play some of them here. This is just a bark, which is typical of them, but here, that's the scream. That's what people often think is a Fisher, but is actually a red fox, which sounds blood-curdling. It's very disturbing for some people to hear that sound, in the middle of the night sometimes. And they yelp as well, and they almost this is a family group reacting together, very close together. So and now it's just a small sampling actually of the different kind of sounds that they can make. So again, that's kind of using part of your ears, for tracking as well. And looking at the actual tracks of a red fox, this time of year, they actually have the ability to kind of grow their own mittens on their feet. Their feet are very furry. There's not a lot of toe pads visible this time of year as opposed to other times of the year. This is kind of a spring or a fall image of their paws where you can see a little bit more of their tracks. So just like if you had mittens on and you put your hand in the snow, obviously you're going to see a lot less detail of your fingers. And it's similar for a red fox. It's kind of a muted track in the winter because they do have so much fur on their feet. But if you can kind of really look closely at these tracks here, you can see this chevron shape or this boomerang shape, and that often shows up in their tracks. Not all the time, but often, and that's a kind of a very diagnostic trait of red fox tracks as well too. You don't always get this symbol in here, but when you do, it's it helps you narrow it down to probably being a red fox as opposed to a dog, a domestic dog or something else like that. And here you can see it again in these tracks in the snow that are, again, pretty muted, but that boomerang shape shows up pretty clearly. And in the mud as well too, again, having that furry feet, you can even see, in this tracks here, you can tell how furry this animal's feet are. These pretty good impressions, both the front foot and the hind foot here. Up here, you can see that this has a very furry foot. And all these kinds of photos. So again, some more nice tracks of fox here. You can see in the mud, which are very typical from the fox family. They do have symmetrical tracks, meaning that if you kind of drew a line right down the middle of it and folded it on itself, they'd match up pretty well. So that's a typical kind of trait of red fox. You do often see claws in the tracks as well too. And you do see, again, a lot of fur usually in them. And most times you see claws as well too. But this mud was not very deep, and you don't see claws very well. This is actually a claw mark here. So if you look closely, you can start to see some of the claw marks. This is a claw mark here too, this little dot. So there are some in there, but it's not as prevalent as you might think. And as far as trail patterns, we said the fisher, the weasel shared trail patterns. Also do fox and dogs. This is a direct register trot. So again, each one of these holes in the snow is a front foot and a hind foot, because this animal is trying to conserve energy. Every time the front foot came out, the hind foot landed in the same spot. And this is where a red fox, looks like a female, kind of squatted down and scent marked a little bit there too. And then she kept on going up into the woods there. So sometimes you'll come across these scent marks. And again, if you're brave and you're not sure it's a red fox, if you put your nose pretty close to that and inhale, you're going to smell kind of a skunky, musky smell. It's very distinctive to the red fox. So it's a great way to kind of diagnose what's out there. And what I like about the direct register kind of trail that you see here is, again, you can picture how the animal is moving in your mind here. And what I have here, it shows that the front left leg and the rear right leg move in unison completely. They're almost like they're not attached by a cable here, but it's almost like they were, because they move exactly at the same time. And hopefully we'll be able to see that. Don't need the sound on that. On this video here, a very young and intimidated red fox is moving in that direct register pattern there. I'm going to put it back. Now we're going to watch this animal go forward. Whoops. So let's see if we can get this make that bigger so we can see that a little bit better. So see what I mean there? See how the legs are exactly in unison like that? And see how that hind foot is landing pretty much exactly right where that front foot just vacated from. So it's a very bouncy kind of gait. As you can see this animal move. Your cat at home often moves in this direct register kind of trot here, this gait. So when you notice your cat, kind of moving through your house, watch them, watch their legs kind of match together like that. And is that hind foot landing right where that front foot left from? That would be a direct register track if you could see it in the snow or in some other form there. And that's very common for red fox, but they don't always move in that way. Sometimes they want to move a little bit faster. And this is true for all animals that are moving faster. This is a gallop. Anytime it's kind of a run, it's called a gallop. And anytime so these are two hind feet landing in front of two front feet. So again, remember our rule of thumb, the faster an animal goes, the farther its hind feet land in front of its front feet. So this was an animal, there's groups of four here. So two front feet, a front right, a front left, a rear right, and a rear left, going through as this animal goes through. And it's called transverse, if you want to get in the technical side of this again, because of the order of the way the feet land. They go across the body, right, left, as opposed to what we're going to look at in a minute, which is a rotary gallop, which would be go around the body a different way. It would be right, left, right. And don't worry about that too much right now. We'll look at the detail of that right now in a minute. But right now, I want to show this video again. This as we see the animation up there too of this happening. But this very cooperative red fox actually, direct register trotted out there, and then it got kind of spooked and decided that it was going to gallop its way back out of here. So we can see it do both things. And as it kind of satisfies a little bit of a niche there, shakes off and decides that it's going to run back because it doesn't like where it is there. So that happens very quickly. With the naked eye, that's very hard to see, but luckily we have the power to slow things down here. And as this animal moves forward, we're going to see as it goes by the camera here, we can see the order of the footfalls. So that's, the front right just landed, the front left is landing, the rear end is up in the air, and now the rear right is landing and the rear left. And if you watch, you can see that the rear end lands in front of where those front 2 feet were. Especially on this one here, you can see pretty clearly that landed in front because the animal is gaining speed. So, where those front feet left, the hind feet land in front of. So you're getting a very distinct pattern in the trail here. And just because of time, I'm not going to actually show this video in this one because I do want us to have more time to look into other things. But this is the Rotary Gallop here, just the same thing, but it's a little bit of a faster run. And this is the right front foot, right left foot, rear left foot, rear right foot. So again, just the order of footfall goes around. And these kind of pattern almost looks like an elongated C, the letter C in the snow, as opposed to these two diagonal lines that you see there. This is another look at it. You can see how fast this animal is going. The two front feet here, and then the next set of tracks are way up here. So you really know that this animal is moving very quickly as it's running through the woods. This red fox here. And because of time, again, I'm going to move forward and just show you, how an amazing of an animal red fox is as well too, because of look at the tools that it brings to the table here. These huge ears that allow it to hear mice underneath underneath the snow when they're hunting this time of year. They have this amazing set of teeth. They have of course, the canines and the also these carnassials are called. They're the ones that help kind of shear meat off the bone, but they also have these flat molars too, because they do have a very varied diet. They do eat nuts and berries and things like that as well too. So, and this nose, this long snout, helps them have a great sense of smell as well too. So they're very adept at being in all sorts of different places. And we're going to watch a brief video here of red fox hunting in snow, and if you haven't seen it before, it's a pretty amazing sight to be able to see. So
deep snow covers the black hills with coatings, and hidden under that icy blanket.
Hopefully you can hear this too, but more important to see it.
The odds of catching anything might seem hopeless.
So it's hearing these animals underneath the snow and then launching face first, which is pretty amazing. Deep snow, 3 feet of snow, and it catches them, which is amazing.
But how the heck did he do it?
And again, just for time wise, I want to get us back to the screen here so we can at least go through a couple more animals before I run out of time. I don't know, have the ability to see the chat. I don't know if you can see chat or know how people can chat, Joey, but
Yeah, Ed, we actually have a question for you.
sure.
Is it possible to see a lynx in Cannon, New Hampshire? We had, if not a lynx, then a huge bobcat lounging on our lawn last spring. Its big, fluffy neck fur looked more like a lynx.
Yeah, in Canaan, that would be extremely unlikely. There have been sightings of lynx in northern New Hampshire only recently. And actually, I think they've found that they're breeding in northern Vermont and New Hampshire, but very, very small population of them. And not like, again, I never say never, never say always, but the odds are that it was a very lynxy looking bobcat that you saw. It would be very unusual to have a lynx this far south down here. But again, anything's possible, but I'll put my money on it was a bobcat. Which maybe it might not be a bad, since we were talking about them. Now maybe we can get into bobcat.
Yeah, just a heads up, Ed, we have about 5 minutes.
Sure, yep.
For this.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to move through this fairly quickly. So bobcat, they can be very large too. New Hampshire had a record one that was trapped that was 52 pounds. So they're not the common bobcat. Most of them, large males closer to 30 pounds. And the females, closer to the 15-pound area. This is a large, pretty good sized male and a female here. You can see that they are built a little differently. And looking at their tracks, just kind of compare them. I'm moving faster just so that we can see some of these things. I know, just so you know, during non-COVID times, I like to do these in person, and sometimes we do a full 2 hours of presenting. So, hopefully I'll be able to do that sometime in the future again too. And some of you folks are able to come out in the woods with me and actually try to find some of these things. But looking at a cat track, we can see that there's obvious differences between, the cat and the dog tracks that we saw. This is a bobcat track compared to a coyote track. The biggest differences are, of course, the lack of claws that most often you're not going to see in cat tracks. And they're not symmetrical, meaning, this coyote track, you can draw this X marks the spot right in the middle of it and kind of fold over itself. You can't do that with a cat track because, you can see, especially in this toe here, it's not symmetrical. Actually, the toe is a little higher in that particular paw there. But conveniently enough, you can draw this kind of C around this cat track here, C for cat, which you wouldn't be able to do there. And also the heel pad of the cat kind of looks like an M. You have 2 dot bumps in the top and 3 in the bottom. So M for meow for a cat too. So you kind of can have, that's a good way to tell them apart. And this is just to show you the difference between a domestic cat track and a bobcat track. A full adult bobcat is going to have, at least twice the size of a cat track, a couple inches usually, as opposed to, maybe an inch for most domestic cats. And cats like to do, they like to walk when possible. There's a bobcat walking through the snow, and these are an overstep walk here, or they direct register walk too. So again, this is that a front foot and a hind foot landing on top of it right here. Again, a very conservation of energy thing to do. Now, the reason I kind of moved us up this slide here is because often when you're tracking bobcats, you're seeing this kind of pattern in the snow, or this kind of pattern in the snow. And what that is, because they're cats, their hunting style is usually to go to a place where they know there's going to be good prey and wait for that prey to show up, rather than like a fisher that it's always on the move, moving through its territory, trying to stir up where it knows squirrels or things like that are, and then chase them down. A bobcat will go to that same area, sit and wait for a squirrel to kind of show itself, and then we'll go after it. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. These are sit spots. This is where a bobcat sat in the snow. This is its haunches here, its hind legs, and kind of almost see its tail there. This is even more so of a sit here. It's more of a crouch. It's kind of, again, it's 2 hind feet, and then it kind of, inched its way up here to be in this stage. This one makes me think that this bobcat actually saw something down there, and then, started to kind of slowly make its way down there to try to get what it was looking at. I followed these tracks, and it didn't seem to come across anything. So whatever it was looking at seemed to have gotten away, but that's one way that they like to do that. And I know we're getting very short on time here, so just try to do something that's a little bit different than some of the other categories that we did here. Something that you might see that we have around here. We might as well do porcupine. And porcupines, again, can be enormous. They can be almost 40 pounds for a large one, but again, most of them are closer to probably the 20-pound range. And they are very unique because of those quills, and they don't have a lot of fear because of those quills. And they get hit by a lot of cars because of those quills, because they're not used to being afraid of many things, and they'll slowly make their way across the road and think that the car is going to back off first. And of course, the car doesn't, because we don't see them, and they get hit by cars more often maybe than some other animals might that are more cautious out there. But they do have very long claws. Those are for digging and for climbing trees as well too. Gives them a very good grip on trees. And they are vegetarians almost exclusively too. They eat a lot of, they peel the bark off of trees and get down in that cambium layer, and that's where they get, especially in the winter this time of year, when they get a lot of their food. And if you get tracking conditions just right, they have very pebbly feet, and you can see that, especially when they go through the mud, which is a very good way to diagnose it. And of course, they have those quills and those heavy tails. A lot of times they're dragging that behind them in the snow, is what you're seeing here. And again, going fast here because we're so short. They are very low to the ground, so as snow gets deep, they'll see these troughs. They'll use the same trail over and over again when they go from their den to where they eat, which at this time of year is usually in a hemlock tree. So they have these very well-worn paths that are kind of these troughs that are dug throughout their territories here. There's another one, and this one is climbing up this hemlock tree. And here we can see that this is why they are able to get at that wood, because of these amazing front teeth they have that are very sharp. And they can do a lot of damage to trees, which is why a lot of foresters don't like porcupines very much, because they can actually kill trees by feeding heavily on them. Just looking closely at it, but I do want to show you before the end here, this time of year, they're spending a lot of time in their dens, and it's kind of gross to us, but they actually, this is their scat, and they spend a lot of time around their own scat because they eat basically all woody material this time of year. So it's a very sawdust kind of like scat material, which not only helps with insulation, might keep it a little bit warmer in there, but also not a lot of animals want to move into their dens when they're full of their own scat. Kind of a nice way to keep other animals from trying to get them out of there. And they have dens in trees, they have dens underground like this one here. And this is a spot where I knew to look for a den, because keep an eye out for this when you're walking through the woods and you see a lot of broken down hemlock branches down here. That's a good sign that maybe a porcupine was there, because they'll bite off the end of a branch and pull it close to themselves and then eat the very terminal ends of these branches, then just drop them on the ground. And you see these littered throughout the area here. And this is actually that den. I was able to see it there. And I think, unfortunately, it's probably all we have time for, at least for the presentation part. I'm happy to answer more questions or anything like that if you have those, Joey.
Yeah, I have one question for you, and then we can wrap up. The question is, sometimes we see tracks that seem to suddenly end. Has the animal turned around and used the same tracks back?
That could very well be the case, for sure. I mean, sometimes, it could be also the conditions of, if it's a relatively light animal and it's going through snow and there's kind of a crusty layer on top, sometimes they'll stay on top of the snow. They don't always break through the snow, and they'll still be on top of it. So you might not see that. There's some cases, depending on maybe if it's a rabbit, or especially like mice or squirrels. Sometimes it's because an owl came down and swooped down and grabbed them and flew off with them. Often when that's the case, you see the imprints of the owl's wings, especially in good snow conditions. You don't always see that, but most times you would see that. So that's also a very fun and interesting thing to see in the snow for sure too, is where a barred owl or a great horned owl swooped down and grabbed a mouse or a squirrel.
Awesome, thank you, Ed. So it's past 1. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope everyone leaves here with some insight on tracking, so you can start a new hobby during this tough winter to get through. Today was the first of many upcoming workshops. So the next one will be on February 23rd, the same time from 12 to 1. That will be all on the secret lives of bats. And if you want to know what the secret is, you have to attend the workshop.
Joey?
What was that?
Joey, will this be available to view online?
Yep.
This lecture?
Yes, the presentation is being recorded and it'll be posted online.
Thank you. Most excellent.
Yep. And future workshops will be about becoming a community scientist, how to certify your backyard as wildlife habitat, and how to get started composting.
Cool.
Really excited to bring those workshops to you all. I hope you come back for another one, and be on the lookout for an email if you registered for today. It looks like there's a few questions, Ed, if you can hang on a little bit longer to get through.
Sure, absolutely.
And I won't keep you guys any longer. So if you don't have any more questions, I hope you have a great week, and thank you for joining today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
So Ed, your question is, which large cats can be observed around Woodstock?
Bobcats are, by far what you're going to see around Woodstock. I've definitely seen their tracks many times in the park. mostly in the woods, but sometimes they do, they'll cross the road to get to the Billings farm. I've seen that for sure too, down in that area. But yeah, as far as like lynx, not going to see them in this area. Mountain lions, there's always, many sightings, dozens of sightings of mountain lions throughout the Northeast every year, but there's still not been a documented, population of mountain lions that live here. There was one that was hit by a car in Connecticut, I think 2011, somewhere around there, which is pretty amazing. They were able to do DNA analysis of that particular animal and found that it actually walked from the foothills of the Dakotas and across interstates and highways and yards and fields and made it all the way to Connecticut. Did eventually get hit by a car there, but but there hasn't been any, with all the wildlife cameras and trackers and, that are out there, looking for tracks and looking for signs of, mountain lions would leave a lot of sign of, deer behind that they've eaten, they've taken down. That'd be their prime, by far their prime prey in this area. And there hasn't been a single deer found that has been predated upon by a mountain lion in this area. So while there's always a chance a rogue animal might move through here, until there's a breeding population of males and females, which who knows if and when that would ever happen, they're not really going to be in the area. So kind of a long-winded way of saying that, bobcats are your prime thing that you're going to see in this area.
There's another question, but I think I can answer this one. The question is, how would we join one of your 2-hour tours? The answer to that is, unfortunately, when COVID's over. So once we're allowed to safely gather in person again, we will resume the workshops in person. Those are anywhere from 1 to 3 hours with an in-person component. For now, we're limited on what we can do. So sorry to say, I don't have an answer for you as to when that'll be possible. But if anyone has any ideas, please let me know. I'm wondering myself. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. Thank you so much, Ed. I really enjoyed this. I hope everyone else enjoyed it. And thank you, Billings Farm, for co-hosting with us. And thank you, everyone who's still on, for attending today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Have a great week.
Take care.
Thanks, Ed and Joey.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Awesome.